John Pemberton died in 1888, broke, sick, and addicted to morphine, in a rented room in Atlanta, having already sold away nearly all his rights to the drink that would become the most recognized brand on earth. The men who bought those rights from him went on to build an empire worth billions. Pemberton got a few $1,000s and a funeral paid for by friends. The question is why a man who supposedly cured his own addiction ended up dying from one. Here's the story most people think they know. Coca-Cola began as a quirky, wholesome soda fountain treat, invented by accident in a backyard, mixed up in a three-legged brass kettle by a kindly pharmacist just looking for a refreshing drink for the people of Atlanta. The brand has spent more than a century reinforcing this image. The polar bears, the Santa Claus ads from the 1930s, the Share a Coke campaigns, the red and white script that feels almost patriotic. Coca-Cola positions itself as an American institution, something stitched into the fabric of family gatherings and summer cookouts, a drink so ordinary and safe that parents hand it to children without a second thought. Even the name feels innocent now, like cola always meant nothing more than a flavor. The company's own historical materials, for decades, described Pemberton simply as an Atlanta pharmacist who created a delicious and refreshing drink in 1886. That framing is technically true. It is also almost entirely stripped of context, because the man who invented Coca-Cola was not experimenting with refreshment. He was a Confederate veteran carrying a battlefield wound and a morphine habit that never left him, and the drink that would conquer the world started as his attempt to escape both. John Stith Pemberton served in the Confederate cavalry and was wounded at the Battle of Columbus, Georgia, in April 1865, one of the last engagements of the Civil War. Like tens of thousands of wounded veterans of that era, he was treated with morphine, and like many of them, he never fully broke free of it. Pemberton was already a trained pharmacist before the war, and after it, he threw himself into the same industry that had addicted him, patent medicine. This was the golden age of tonics, elixirs, and miracle cures, a largely unregulated marketplace where druggists could bottle almost anything and sell it as medicine. Pemberton became fascinated by one product in particular, a French wine called Vin Mariani, created by chemist Angelo Mariani in Paris in the 1860s, which infused Bordeaux wine with coca leaf extract. Vin Mariani was wildly popular among European elites. It was reportedly endorsed by figures ranging from Pope Leo XIII to Thomas Edison, who praised it for its energizing effects. But it gets stranger. Pemberton didn't just admire the product. He copied its core idea directly, mixing coca leaf extract with wine and cola nut extract. And in 1885, he began selling his own version in Atlanta under the name Pemberton's French Wine Coca. He marketed it, like nearly every patent medicine of the era, as a cure for nervousness, for fatigue, and specifically, in his own advertising, as a remedy for morphine addiction. The man addicted to morphine was selling a coca wine tonic as the cure for morphine addiction, but that's the part most people never hear. In 1886, Atlanta and Fulton County passed local prohibition legislation, temporarily banning the sale of alcohol. Pemberton's wine-based tonic was suddenly illegal to sell as formulated, so he reworked the recipe into a non-alcoholic version, sweetened with sugar syrup instead of wine, and kept the two active ingredients that gave the original its kick: extract from the coca leaf, the plant cocaine is derived from, and extract from the cola nut, a natural source of caffeine. The name he landed on for this new formula was blunt, almost clinical: Coca-Cola, after its two key ingredients. It was his bookkeeper, Frank Mason Robinson, who came up with the name and hand-lettered the flowing script logo still used today, reportedly because he thought the two C's would look good in advertising. The drink debuted at Jacobs's Pharmacy in downtown Atlanta on May 8, 1886, sold for 5 cents a glass, marketed initially as a brain tonic and headache remedy rather than a refreshment. Here's where it gets darker. Contemporary trade advertisements from Pemberton described the drink in openly medicinal, almost pharmaceutical language, listing it alongside treatments for nervous conditions. And some historians have noted the coca extract in the original formula would have delivered a measurable, if small, dose of cocaine per serving, alongside the caffeine from the cola nut. This was not hidden or coded. Cocaine itself was legal and widely used in American medicine and consumer products throughout the late 1800s. It appeared in tonics, lozenges, toothache drops, and, notoriously, in early formulations of products marketed even to soothe teething infants. Coca-Cola, in its first years, existed inside that same unregulated landscape, sold as much for its stimulant properties as for its taste. Pemberton's health was already failing. He had stomach cancer, alongside the morphine dependency that had shadowed him since the war, and by 1887 and 1888, desperate for money to pay for medical treatment, he began selling off pieces of his rights to the Coca-Cola formula to multiple different buyers, sometimes overlapping sales to different parties, creating a legal tangle over who actually owned the drink. One of the buyers was Asa Griggs Candler, a fellow Atlanta druggist with sharper business instincts and none of Pemberton's addiction. By the time Pemberton died in August 1888, Candler had methodically consolidated control of the formula, eventually gaining full ownership by 1891 for a total investment historians estimate at around $2,300. Candler was the one who transformed Coca-Cola from a regional pharmacy tonic into a nationally distributed, aggressively marketed consumer product, and it was under Candler's ownership, not Pemberton's, that public and medical concern about cocaine began catching up with the drink. By the early 1900s, cocaine's reputation in American medicine and media had curdled. Reports of addiction were rising, and cocaine use was increasingly and often racially associated in the press with crime, feeding into the social panic that would eventually help drive federal drug legislation. Facing this shifting climate, Coca-Cola's chemists changed the formula sometime around 1903, switching to what was described as decocainized coca leaf, a version of the leaf extract processed to remove the cocaine alkaloid while keeping the coca flavor. The company has maintained, both then and since, that the change was about caffeine regulation concerns rather than any admission of prior harm. But the timeline is hard to ignore. Coca-Cola quietly removed cocaine from its own recipe at almost the exact moment cocaine became a national scandal, without ever loudly announcing to the public that the drink they'd been drinking for nearly 2 decades had contained it in the first place. Slow down here, because this is the part that reframes everything. The myth is that Coca-Cola was invented as an innocent soft drink. The truth is that it was invented as a medicine, by an addict, modeled directly on a European cocaine wine tonic, sold explicitly as a cure for the very kind of dependency its own inventor suffered from. Pemberton wasn't a hobbyist pharmacist stumbling into refreshment. He was a wounded veteran chasing relief, using the same unregulated pharmaceutical culture that had hooked him to try to build something that could save him. Financially, physically, maybe even morally, it didn't. And the twist within that twist is this. The company that eventually erased cocaine from the formula and built the wholesome, family-friendly image the world knows today did so under Asa Candler, a man who had no hand in creating the drink at all. The sanitized, all-American Coca-Cola of Santa Claus ads and Sunday dinners was built by the person who bought a dying addict's desperation for a couple $1,000s. The formula change in 1903 didn't end the scrutiny. In 1909, federal agents seized a shipment of Coca-Cola syrup in Chattanooga under the new Pure Food and Drug Act. The case became known as United States versus 40 barrels and 20 kegs of Coca-Cola. Leading the charge was Harvey Washington Wiley, the USDA's crusading chief chemist. Officially, the fight was over caffeine, but the drink's cocaine past lingered in the background, feeding the suspicion. The case dragged on for years, reaching the Supreme Court in 1916. Coca-Cola lost on procedural grounds and cut its caffeine. The cocaine question, though, was never fully aired in public. It just faded, folded into a formula locked away, company lore says, in a vault in Atlanta. By 1914, when the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act formally regulated cocaine, Coca-Cola had already scrubbed it from the recipe and spent a decade rebranding as harmless refreshment. The origin story shifted too. Pemberton became just the pharmacist. The addiction, the coca wine tonic he copied, the medicinal claims, all faded into footnotes, buried under decades of cheerful advertising. Historians have resurfaced pieces of it since. The full picture rarely broke through. What lingers isn't the cocaine, it's the shape of the story. A desperate, addicted man's cure, quietly rewritten once the truth became a liability. That brass kettle still shows up in company retellings. Homespun accident, not a chemist chasing his own recovery. The most trusted brands rarely lie outright. They just choose what to forget. Want me to apply the same tightening pass to any other section, or is this the length you're aiming for throughout?